The F-16. An aerodynamic masterpiece.
The F-16 fighter, as its makers see it.
In the air combat arena, the F-16 pilot commands an aerodynamic machine designed to outturn and out-accelerate any other fighter in the world today.
This is the story of a fighter plane at the center of one of the biggest arms deals in history. At stake, not only a $2.5 billion contract, but tens of thousands of jobs, the survival of some of the biggest defense contractors in the Western world, and the relationship of European countries to each other and to America. It was a deal they called the sale of the century. Russian armies practice invading the West in an exercise planned to rehearse the Third World War. To counter Soviet strength on the ground, the West relies on air power. For 20 years, NATO's frontline combat plane was the Lockheed Starfighter. By the early 1970s, it was due for replacement. 4 countries were in the market for a new lightweight fighter: Norway, Denmark, Holland, and Belgium. Together, they wanted a total of 348 fighter planes with an enormous price tag. Would they buy American or buy European? Their final decision would be crucial to both Europe's aircraft industry and to the continuing dream of European unity. On the seller's side, the field soon narrowed to 4 contenders: 2 from Europe and 2 from America. The leading European contender was Dassault of France. Their entry, the Mirage F-1E. Dassault's chief military advisor, General Pierre Gallois, lists the Mirage's advantages.
First, it was a European aircraft because designed in Europe and built in Europe. B, it was an aircraft having superior qualities as far as speed, supersonic speed is concerned. And 3, it was also built around a French engine than an European engine. Then we thought that we could propose such an aircraft to help making an independent European industry.
Some of the customer countries interpreted your arguments for a European solution as being arguments, in fact, for French domination of the market.
Possibly, but France is a European country after all. And I don't know what is the difference between American dominance and French dominance, except that America is 6,000 kilometers away.
The second European contender was Saab Scania of Sweden. Their entry, the Viggen.
Saab 37 Viggen, a multi-purpose aircraft for the 80s and 90s.
The Swedish Air Force had been a loyal customer, but the company needed to break into the export market. This sale was their big chance, especially as their Scandinavian neighbors were among the buyers. But Saab and Dassault shared an ironic weakness. Both were outside the European NATO club. France had walked out of NATO's military organization, and Sweden, with its long tradition of neutrality, had never joined. America naturally exploited such a weakness. 2 American companies were competing in the sale of the century. First, the Northrop Corporation. Their entry, the F-17 Cobra. And the last of the 4 contenders was General Dynamics with the F-16.
From the moment he starts the F-16 with its internal self-starter, the pilot commands a combat fighter designed and engineered for the greatest ease of handling ever built.
Operating out of Fort Worth, Texas, far from the worldly wiles and political maneuvering of Washington or California, General Dynamics presented itself as inexperienced in foreign trade. It was a useful image to have, according to General Dynamics Chief Executive David Lewis.
The very fact that we had inexperience and didn't perhaps know our way around as well in the ways of doing international business was in the long run very, very helpful to us, because we didn't get ourselves involved in a number of things that we would have regretted. We also didn't have to use any non-standard sales techniques at all. And so we were operating, we thought, from a position of strength while being very eager to win.
General Dynamics got a bad name in the 1960s when its F-111 fighter bomber ended up costing 3 times as much as the company originally estimated. The Air Force showed no enthusiasm for repeat orders, and the future of the mile-long production plant at Fort Worth looked grim. To stay in business, General Dynamics needed a new line, and its only hope was the F-16. But the F-16 was only an experimental prototype, and the Air Force was interested in bigger, more glamorous, and more expensive planes. To open up a market in Europe, David Lewis flew to Paris to talk to the rival Dassault company about co-producing the F-16. General Gallois of Dassault remembers the meeting.
Mr. Dassault was a bit impressed by the person, Mr. Lewis, was not only in charge of a large aircraft company, but having many other activities, including one in which he was making cakes. And I would say that some of these cakes were sent to Mr. Dassault, and they were very difficult to eat, very bad taste. And Mr. Dassault thought that it was difficult at the same time to make good aircraft and to make cakes.
The prototype F-16 continued its routine testing program. Chief Test Pilot Phil Erstreicher tells what happened at its first high-speed taxi trials.
The airplane accelerated very well and was soon seen to be at the 135-knot target level. I raised the nose, and the airplane rather abruptly became airborne and immediately went into a very severe pilot-induced oscillation in roll. I could see that there was really no hope of keeping the airplane on the pavement, and elected to fly it away because I could see severe damage and possibly total loss of the airplane occurring as it went out into the unprepared surface.
Within months, General Dynamics had solved most of these problems, and it was ready for the NATO competition. Together, General Dynamics and Northrop played the NATO card, the argument that NATO should buy from within the alliance, which meant buying American. But whether an American or a European plane was chosen, one thing was certain. The buyers were demanding that some of the planes be built in the buying countries to provide jobs at home and to offset costs. The seller who offered most by way of co-production and offset arrangements would have the support of industry and the unions. So representatives of the 4 manufacturers started touring with packages of promises. Henk Vos runs the Aerospace Workers Division of Holland's Metal Workers Union.
The producers of the aeroplanes came to us and asked us to have a discussion with them. Well, the first who came was Saab Scania, and they made us an offer for compensation. And that was for 100% of the price we should pay for the aeroplanes we need.
How many jobs would that involve?
Well, I think I think a couple of thousand. And that was very important because we have an employment problem.
Dassault also made an offer.
You know, with French people, you have to write it black and white on the paper 4 times because you exactly know what they promised. And that's why we were not very glad with the offer of the French. But later they tried to make a better offer.
What kind of offer did the Americans make?
There was from Northrop a delegation of 1 man who came in with, I think, such a cigar. He came in, he said to us, "Hi folks, I am here to sell you the best plane we have in the world, and that's, I think, the best compensation you can get for your 2.5 billion guilders." And that was, I think, the whole discussion we had with him, because 20 minutes later he was on his way home, and we never heard again from Northrop.
Till now, the 4 buyers had been acting independently. Norway had always bought American and was expected to continue. The Danes had bought Swedish planes in the past, but the Americans hoped to win them over. The Dutch had strong links with Northrop, and Belgium was divided, the Flemish North favoring an American plane, and the French-language South preferring Dassault. But early in 1974, the picture suddenly changed. The 4 countries announced that they would all buy the same plane, forming a consortium to negotiate jointly with the sellers. The winner would take all. And not everyone wanted the lightweight planes. General John Vogt felt the bigger but very expensive F-16 was a better buy.
I think we must have airplanes that can fight round the clock and regardless of weather conditions. I know it's popular now to talk about airplanes that are cheaper, airplanes that can do the job for less money, but the simple fact of the matter is that it's false economy.
But if the United States Air Force didn't buy a lightweight fighter, the F-16 or the Cobra, the sale would certainly go to the Europeans. Europe wasn't likely to buy an American plane which the Americans themselves weren't buying. Something had to be done to persuade the Air Force to want a lightweight fighter after all. And so, in June 1974, the Pentagon and the Air Force reached an agreement. The Air Force would get a lot more planes if it ordered one of the 2 lightweight fighters. It was only weeks before the arrival in Washington of the European partners. The chairman of the consortium was Norwegian General Sverre Hamre.
That changed, of course, the whole picture for us as far as U.S. aircraft was concerned.
Did you feel that there was any possible connection between your visit and that announcement being made at that time?
Oh, I would say that I had quite a distinct feeling that there was a close connection between our visit and that decision.
I was not consulted at any time, either by my own Air Force or by the NATO Air Forces involved.
But you were the commander of NATO Air Forces in
Yes.
Central Europe.
And I think it's ironic, but the system is such in NATO that NATO commanders have very little to do with the choice of equipment that they're going to have to fight with. This is not only true in the air, but it's true on the ground as well. There simply is no system in being that I'm aware of that would enable a combat commander who will have to fight the forces to have anything to do with the selection of the equipment.
It sounds as if you're saying that the decision as to what aircraft should be bought tends to be a political, diplomatic, economic decision rather than a strategic decision.
I think those forces become extremely important, if not overriding.
So now we were looking at a stated requirement for the first time of 650 airplanes for the U.S. And the Europeans at that point were talking about 350. So we could suddenly see here's a possibility of 1,000 airplanes, whereas 3 months before there was nothing, except some warm feelings here and there.
The sale was suddenly big business, and Northrop and General Dynamics were both very interested. But first, the Pentagon had to decide which plane it would buy, the Cobra or the F-16. In the fall of 1974, the rival planes showed their strengths in a competitive fly-off. The Europeans were invited as observers, encouraging them as buyers to think American. In January 1975, the Pentagon announced its choice.
The F-16 means air supremacy.
Rejected by the U.S. Air Force, Northrop was effectively out of the sale of the century. That left three contenders: Saab with the Viggen, Dassault with the Mirage F-1E, and General Dynamics with the F-16.
General Dynamics thought at that moment they were in certain exclusive position because the F-16 was the only American aeroplane who was still in the race. They thought they could sell us that plane without any compensation. At that moment, we organized the discussion public about the Swedish alternative and said that is the best compensation offer we have, and we as trade unions have the opinion that we have to buy the Saab Viggen because that's the best injection we can give to our full employment question here in Holland. And at that moment, General Dynamics came back with another offer.
This was the new offer from General Dynamics and the Pentagon. Of the first 1,000 F-16s, 650 would be built for America and 348 for Europe. The Europeans would build 10% of the 650 planes ordered by the U.S. and 40% of the 348 ordered by the Europeans. And they would build 15% of additional planes ordered by other countries. This 10-40-15 deal amounted to at least 58% industrial offset, estimated to represent 25,000 jobs in Europe. The offer looked lower than Saab's or Dassault's, but it had one vital ingredient the others lacked: that promise of a share in sales to third-party countries. According to General Dynamics salesman Blaine Scheiderman, huge orders were confidently expected.
We suggest that the minimum market that we can look to is 2,000 airplanes. But most certainly we're looking for a market more in the 4,500 to 5,000 area over between this time period and the 1990s.
It was a tempting offer, and the Danes, who had been favoring the Viggen, began to think again. But there were complications. Danish Member of Parliament Niels Helveg Petersen explains.
Well, there was one problem that to me was the overriding problem. That was to whether or not Denmark should be morally involved in an undertaking of this kind. Until that time, we have had a very restrictive arms export policy. We have maintained that from Denmark weapons or weapon systems should not be exported to third countries where they could ever be used or be involved in military engagements. And this whole policy was at stake at that time.
It was a powerful card to play. General Dynamics only needed half the foreign sales for the 4 NATO countries to double their co-production earnings. As the deadline approached, the bidding got hotter. Saab tabled a price tag of $9 million per plane. Dassault retaliated with a fixed price offer, backed by a French government guarantee of $6.4 million for the Mirage. But General Dynamics trumped this with the offer of what they called a not-to-exceed price of $6.09 million. And they followed up with a promise of high technology transfer. The argument that European industry would reap the benefits of America's most advanced research and development, particularly in space-age electronics. It was a battle of words and statistics.
Tremendous high-performance aircraft.
We are able to match them.
The all-weather capability,
The engine is one of the finest ever made.
operating from roads.
We call it a swing fighter.
Super qualities as far as supersonic speed is
We
concerned.
got something unique in my judgment.
Each of the contending parties presented its own statistical data with all the appearance of selfless objectivity. The Swedish tables showed the Viggen to be the best buy. The French tables put the Mirage on top, while the consortium's own technical advisors, fresh from their experiences in America, put the F-16 ahead on 5 out of 8 counts. And the U.S. Defense Department fielded its own sales team, directed by General Howard Fish of the Pentagon. As far as the other competitors were concerned, the Defense Department was working hand in glove with the men from Fort Worth.
I think that the companies involved, unquestionably acting as rational capitalistic enterprises, try to maximize their sales, and in that sense they did do a certain amount of selling. The Pentagon, I wouldn't characterize it as so much as selling as more providing the information and allowing and encouraging our partners to make their own decision.
General Fish's strongest argument was the need to standardize NATO's equipment.
Well, standardization is really to strengthen the overall alliance, primarily, I believe, by making sure that the total resources of the alliance that is used for defense, that are spent for defense, gets the purchases the most capability. I think it's true that NATO probably spends about as much as Warsaw Pact, and you could differ on the figures somewhat, but it's not necessarily true we get the same capability because of a lack of standardization. So the ultimate aim of standardization is to get more bang for the buck.
Standardization of armament had a meaning 50 years ago when we were planning for an attrition war lasting months and months and years. But today, the amount of destruction, the modern weapons, is such that wars are lasting 2, 3 days, 6 days maximum. And even a NATO general said that in 48 hours, the Russian could reach the Rhine with purely commercial means. Personally, I think that they could destroy all the NATO inventory in 10 minutes with SS-20s. Then standardization of equipment has no meaning because you have no time to need spare parts from the other. You fight with what you have.
No matter how much the European contenders shuffled their arguments, they couldn't overcome one weakness. Niels Helvig Petersen, Danish Member of Parliament, explains.
Once it was decided that 4 countries, Denmark, Norway, Holland, and Belgium, were negotiating as one for the largest weapon deal of this century, in fact, the decision was taken. Within the group of 4, it would never be possible to agree on a Swedish plane. That would be absolutely alien, I think, for example, for the Belgians. It would never be possible to agree on a French plane. That would be equally strange, I think, for example, Norwegians. So, in fact, once the 4 decided to go together, it seems to me there were no other possibilities than the F-16.
By April 1975, Norway, Denmark, and Holland had decided for the F-16. Only the Belgians, with their French-Flemish split, remained undecided. In May, Defense Minister Paul van den Buynants visited Washington, a politician with a problem. So the Americans tabled this trump card, a last-minute promise by the U.S. government to buy $30 million of machine guns from the Belgian arms firm Fabrique Nationale. The deal pleased both parties. Pro-American Belgians got the plane they wanted, while the French-speaking community got most of the jobs. In June 1975, representatives of all the contenders converged on Paris for the air show.
Well, we were at the Paris Air Show with our beautiful little red, white, and blue airplane, putting on a marvelous show every day, and we, at that time, I think, felt that we were either going to win or the whole joint program would fall apart.
They won.
Bill, this is great for the Air Force and great for NATO, great for our company at General Dynamics. We're all very excited and thrilled that this great airplane has taken another giant step forward. So congratulations. We ought to go ahead and celebrate.
Yes, sir.
I guess always when you win, you wish you had not given quite so much.
On October 20th, 1976, the first full-scale development F-16 rolled out of the Fort Worth plant, blessed by politicians and a specially commissioned prayer that read, "O God of nations and of men, be witness, we pray thee, to the firm intent that this plane be a weapon solely of defense. Wilt thou therefore bless this plane's purpose, that it may deter or quickly overcome aggression, and that it may truly become an instrument of peace, more plowshare than sword, more pruning hook than spear. We thank thee for the excellent minds and energy that brought this project to fruition, for the useful competition out of which it was born, and for the mutual cooperation which makes its production possible. Amen."
As free nations, we must cooperate even more in the period ahead. Our deterrence and defense are fundamental to the preservation of our freedom. $1.3 billion worth of contracts have been signed with other countries, strengthening the aircraft production base on the other side of the Atlantic as well as here, without increasing the cost of the aircraft.
The Americans had made a lot of promises. A not-to-exceed price, 58% industrial offset, providing 25,000 jobs in Europe, high technology transfer, a European share in sales to any future buyers, and, of course, the right plane for the job, an all-weather multi-role fighter. First, the price.
Was the not-to-exceed price a U.S. government promise?
The not-to-exceed price is expressed in detail. It's a very technical discussion within the meaning of the MOU. I don't think that I could really do justice to it in this interview. I would refer you to the details of the Memorandum of Understanding and how it's defined. And it's, again, as I say, it's a very technical, precise definition, which I would prefer you consult the written word to be sure that it's said properly and correctly.
In Washington, the General Accounting Office agreed that not to exceed is a complicated term. Acting as an impartial watchdog over public spending, the GAO issued a report to Congress in 1977 about the multinational F-16 program. The report said that there is no common understanding of the meaning of the not-to-exceed price. Author of the GAO report and head of its weapons acquisition unit, Jerome Stollerow.
The not-to-exceed price, to be very honest, is a figure that was put in as a goal, and it has a certain definition. That is, it relates to a baseline configuration of the aircraft, what that aircraft looked like really before the development program started. The changes that are made to the aircraft that are due to testing, to the development program, necessary changes, are not
and which increase the cost of the program, are by definition not charged against the not-to-exceed price. So that while the costs are going up, by the definition that was placed on the not-to-exceed price, I think it's fair to say that it probably will not be breached. But that doesn't mean that the aircraft will not cost more than the not-to-exceed price. It's a little difficult concept for the people that are not familiar with costs and with development programs to understand.
Well, it is, because most people would think a not-to-exceed price means a not-to-exceed price, that it won't be exceeded.
In terms of the dollars, even in the baseline dollars that we used for that figure, the actual aircraft will cost more than the not-to-exceed price.
At Wright-Patterson Air Base near Dayton, Ohio, the simple prototype F-16 was developed into a multi-role fighter. The man in charge, Major General James Abramson.
It's likely that the price is going to go up further. Now, if it does exceed the not-to-exceed price, who pays the excess?
The Europeans will pay for that. They have agreed to that. The 6.091 is a commitment for a certain specification airplane. And we are well, or not well, we are just very slightly within that, but we are within it. Some of the modifications are new capabilities that are being added. And where that's the case, then we all agree that that's something over and above what our initial contract was, and therefore the price should go higher for those items. And so in that sense, you're right. Where it is an additional capability, the price will go up. It's kind of like if you want to put a tape cassette in your car, it costs more than what the sticker price is. In order to get a balanced perspective here, that we really need to be able to measure against the criticals as well.
General Abramson chairs the weekly meetings of the Air Force management team known as the Systems Program Office. Their job is to oversee the manufacturers and subcontractors of all equipment and components added to the plane.
Categorized by priority 1, 2, and 3, and which correlate to the events.
I have test. We can see that we started off behind.
Although the 4 European air forces each send 1 representative, the Americans dominate the committee by force of numbers.
They're running about a week and a half behind meeting their load dates in WBS 1112, which is where fuselage mate is formed.
Every addition to the plane costs money. As early as 1977, the GAO released figures showing that in 12 months, the cost of the first batch of 650 planes had risen by $1.4 billion. Today, the cost of a single F-16 is estimated at $10.8 million for the U.S. Air Force and more than $11 million for Europe. Denmark now expects to spend more than 90% of its entire arms budget next year on the F-16, and Norway more than 70%. In August 1977, the GAO recommended that in future co-production agreements, particular care be taken to avoid use of not-to-exceed prices and to avoid any implication that changes are unlikely. Next, the promised 58% offset. To make good their promises of co-production, the Americans signed contracts with manufacturers in all 4 buying countries. By 1977, F-16 parts were being made and assembled in more than 40 European locations. Ironically, it's Belgium, the last and most reluctant buyer of the F-16, which has benefited most. Here at Fabrique Nationale, the company whose $30 million machine gun deal with the Pentagon clinched the F-16 contract, a brand new plant has been opened to make and assemble F-16 engines. The engine contract alone is worth $735 million. Belgium also has a major wings assembly plant near Brussels, adding up to a 70% industrial offset. With their own established aircraft industry, Fokker, the Dutch also hoped for big contracts. The American offer was calculated to provide 25,000 man-years of work in Holland. Union leader Henk Voss.
How far have General Dynamics fulfilled their promises on jobs?
Well, I cannot give you an exactly answer on that question because the whole co-production is going on till 1983. But for the moment, we know rather exactly that they had promised us 25,000 man-years, and they cannot give us more than about 11,000. That means that we have under 50% of all the promises they made.
You expect the other half to be made up in the remaining years?
No chance, no chance.
And according to Niels Helvig Petersen, it's the same story in Denmark.
So far, one can say that the promises of employment have not been kept. I'm not saying this is a fault on the American side. We are not used to producing that kind of thing in Denmark, and therefore there may be shortcomings on part of Danish industry, not being able to compete and not being able to fulfill requirements. But facts stand. What we have had so far, a co-production, falls far short of what was promised. That's the fact.
I frankly have no concern that we will not be able to meet the 58%.
Some of the countries, Denmark, Norway, are significantly below that target figure. Yes. Do you feel confident that you're going to bring them up to 58%?
Yeah, that's another matter. Within the 58%, that was a commitment to Europe as a whole, and I think we can clearly do that. The bulk of that is where there is the primary aircraft and engine manufacturing capability. So that's in the Netherlands and in Belgium, where we have had to make use of a different kind of industrial capability. The industrial capability in Denmark and Norway has been electronic and in component parts, but they don't have really an airframe industry as such. We have had more difficulty. So as a result, Denmark and Norway are low, and Netherlands and Belgium are high. Within that first 58%, we will have great difficulty in completely balancing that.
According to the GAO's latest figures, Belgium has achieved 70% offset, Holland 50%, Norway 40%, and Denmark only 33%. The average offset is almost 52%, but in Norway and Denmark, that isn't much comfort. Next, the promise of high technology transfer.
The F-16 contains one of the most advanced digital avionic designs ever, giving the pilot quick reaction and fingertip control over all flight parameters, from precise, rapid pre-flight programming to highly accurate all-weather weapons delivery.
A U.S. Air Force transport plane lands at Schiphol Airport, Amsterdam. Its load, American-made components to be assembled at a Dutch factory. The Europeans had hoped that by sharing in the manufacture of an American aerospace project, their industries would gain the special skills they'll need to stay competitive in the markets of the future.
I will not claim that there's no high technology elements of the F-16 parts production in Denmark. There is. But I'll say on the whole that the high technology argument in no way justifies entering into a venture of this kind because with so many other implications. I think the high technology spin-off effect of entering the F-16 production from a Danish point of view is not something we can rely on for our industrial future. And I think our industrial future would be miserable if we were to become subcontractors of pieces and bits designed in the United States.
Isn't that exactly what has happened?
That is what has happened, and that is what had to happen. It is developed in the United States. All the brain power put into the development of the F-16 has taken place in the United States. It's been like that, and naturally what we pick up is not the high technology end of it.
Next, the promise of a fortune from sales to additional countries. Europe was promised 15% of all future orders. General Dynamics' Lane Scheiderman had spelled out the full extent of the expected bonanza.
But if we were to use the price that was used for the consortium on its price of $6 million, then 6 million times, say, 4,000 airplanes would be $24 billion.
Today, General Dynamics has just one order on the books, 75 planes for Israel. Europe's share, 11.25 planes. But David Lewis remains optimistic.
We have very ebullient and enthusiastic salesmen, so I'm not sure we'll ever reach 5,000, but I think the prospects are better than ever for third country sales.
It's hard to see where those orders will come from. Of the countries mentioned in 1975 as potential buyers, Spain chose the Mirage, Japan and Saudi Arabia chose the McDonnell Douglas F-15, the Turks ran out of money, and Taiwan, which wants to buy the F-16, hasn't been allowed to do so yet in case Peking is offended. The Shah of Iran placed a substantial order, but the Bakhtiar government canceled it.
I don't think anybody can really forecast what's going to happen to the free world in the next decade, and who's going to be wanting more and who will want less.
You're not going to make those 3, 4, 5,000, though, are you?
Oh, I would say so, yes. I would go pretty... I'd smile for the prospects of 3,000 and be wistful about 4, perhaps.
Finally, the promise that Europe would get the plane it wanted, an all-weather, multi-role fighter. The F-16 has come a long way since its humble birth as a cheap air combat fighter. When the Europeans went shopping for a multi-role plane, General Dynamics obligingly changed its labels. The fully developed F-16 was a much more complex plane than its designers had ever envisioned.
The F-16 combines aerodynamic superiority with a versatile external payload capability of up to 15,000 pounds, enabling it to swing quickly from an air superiority role to a wide range of air-to-ground operations.
But according to general vote, the F-16 has serious limitations.
The F-16 is virtually limited to daylight good weather conditions at the present time. The airplane does not possess the capabilities that I described that are so necessary. It's going to be limited to doing the job essentially under eyeball conditions. Now, they are working, of course, on improvements. It's going to be difficult for them to, I think, acquire that capability in that particular airplane. It's a small airplane, one pilot, no second cockpit. The cubage in the airplane is very small and restricted. You can't put the black boxes in that you can in some of the bigger airplanes. A lot of the gear for all-weather capability that we developed for the F-4, for example, simply can't be carried on something as small as the F-16. That means they have to make new advances in electronic technology. And I think it's going to be a long time before they achieve that kind of capability that I'm describing in an airplane as simple as the F-16. Which is not to say the F-16 doesn't have its merits and advantages. It does. It's highly maneuverable. airplane that probably can take on the best of the Soviet fighters in its own realm, which, as I say, is clear air mass, and do a good job on them. But it's ironic that if the weather happens to be bad, it can't fire its missiles, for example. It's limited to IR missiles that don't operate when the weather's bad. Doesn't have radar capability in the missile systems. Until they correct that deficiency, it's going to be limited.
First of all, there isn't any all-weather fighter. However, there are aircraft that are now achieving a capability that give us some weather capability, and we are adding some of those things to the F-16. In the development program, the radar itself is an effective but low-cost radar, and that is the strongest, most important element of making it a night and giving it some weather capability. There are other things, of course, that we are adding, but the most important is the radar.
And there are other problems as well. The 1978 GAO report said, the rate of loss for the F-16 due to engine malfunction is currently estimated by the Air Force to be 3 times higher than that called for by Air Force specifications. The F-100 engine problems on the F-16 are serious because it has only one engine. Developed for the McDonnell Douglas F-15, the Pratt & Whitney F-100 engine was given its first performance tests in 1973. It failed to meet its specifications, and to get it through the tests, an Air Force general secretly ordered the standards to be lowered. Today, with new problems still under investigation, there are reports that the Air Force is thinking of commissioning a brand new engine from Pratt & Whitney's rival, General Electric. But it's unlikely that a new engine could be made available before the mid-1980s, and 1,000 F-16s are due to become operational before then.
The engine still is a worrisome problem in this program. It's the same engine that is used in our F-15 aircraft, the Pratt & Whitney F-100 engine. In use in the F-15, it has shown some tendencies for stall or stagnations that actually flame out to the uninitiated, where the engine actually stalls out.
And then they can't get it going again.
They can get it going again. Certain procedures can be used by taking the plane down to a lower altitude. In the F-15, it's not quite as serious. The F-15 has 2 of these engines. The F-16, of course, is 1 engine. And, you know, some people have said, well, it can be, the engine can be restarted. But again, if you're in combat and you have to maneuver the plane to avoid enemy aircraft and you lose your engine, the pilot may be dead before he can get the engine restarted.
We consider, and our tests support, the contention that we will have significantly improved that problem. I'm not sure that you ever solve all of these problems, but we've brought it down to well within a safe limit for us.
Is there any worry on your part, though, that in doing these fixes you will impair the performance of the plane? I'm thinking of the ASD committee that evaluated the engine and reported that the price of improved durability is likely to be reduced performance and increased weight. So maybe you'll not be solving the engine problem at the expense of creating other performance problems.
That's always a possibility. To date, on the things that we have introduced, we have added some weight, which obviously always has a small performance impact, but we have not introduced a significant performance impact. There have been some minor ones, however. And you said, do I worry? I worry all the time about the engine, about the airplane.
And there's never been an airplane built anywhere that does not have a certain amount of startup difficulties. You know, that is the nature of building airplanes or cars or anything, I would say. And so, you know, we will have the usual difficulties that will have to be solved and resolved, but it shows great promise. It's performing well. It's meeting expectations.
In your opinion, General, has Europe bought the right plane?
Not in its present form. In my judgment, until that airplane is corrected to give it the capability I described, they have in fact the wrong airplane.
Nearly 4 years after General Dynamics and the Pentagon made the promises which clinched the sale of the century, this is how it looks to the Europeans. They will pay more per plane than the not-to-exceed price. They are not getting all the industrial offset or jobs that were promised. High technology transfer is limited. There have been almost no sales to third-party countries. And there are serious doubts that the plane can do the job it was made for without expensive modifications and fixes. Early in 1979, the first European F-16, a two-seater training plane, rolled off the Belgian production line.
This day is important. It is a major step in an aeronautical program which is not only multinational, but also transatlantic. It also demonstrates that European industry, if it wants to, is capable to establish a firm partnership in order to achieve a common project.
But for Europeans, there's the question of what they've actually achieved. The politicians and the generals are already planning new and bigger deals. Britain, Germany, and the 4 F-16 countries all plan to order a new fighter by 1981. Again, they're talking of European unity and cooperation, and of the need for a strong European aerospace industry. But after the lessons of the F-16, will the Europeans be better prepared to take on the combined strength of American industry and the Pentagon?
I doubt, because after all, nothing has changed. And if I was an American leader, I would exploit such a situation, which they are doing, and I have nothing against, because it's fair, it's normal. You know, during the monarchy, we were used to to rent Swiss soldiers. Well, now in Europe, NATO countries are buying American soldiers.
The Europeans are still arguing about what they bought in the sale of the century. Everyone learned the lessons, but no one can agree what the lessons are.
As free nations, we must cooperate even more in the period ahead.
What is the difference between American dominance and French dominance, except that America is 6,000 kilometers away?
The engine is one of the finest ever made.
Our Channel 8 membership drive, just completed, gained many new friends with their financial pledges for our programs. To new and old friends, whose support is essential for continuing the quality and variety of our television programs, thank you, sincerely and gratefully, from your public TV station.
For a transcript of this program, please send $2 to World, Box 1000, Boston, Massachusetts, 02118. World is produced by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content, and is made possible by grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Ford Foundation, Polaroid Corporation, and the German Marshall Fund of the United States.